What a headshot! What a head!
How's it guys, this is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'll be going over the ultimate guide to the upcoming double game week 36. So double game week 36, the second last double game week of the season, and the third last game week of the entire FPL season. So yes, we are approaching the end of the season, and now it's time for those clutch plays. So hopefully this ultimate guide is going to give you guys some insight into some of those clutch plays. Should you guys go for Wilson or Isaac? Who's the best Solly March replacement? And what are some differentials that you guys can also look at? Now as with every ultimate guide, you're going to start off with the stats review and end off with the Camsey debate, which might be the biggest point swing in game week 36. So if this sounds like something that you guys are interested in, sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So the first talking point, as I mentioned in the introduction, is going to be the stats review. I go over the attacking stats and the defensive stats of the best and worst 6 teams. Now I've split this up into two kind of timings. The first timing is since the restart. That's going to be after the World Cup from game week 17 to the last couple game weeks. And the second timing is going to be the last 6 games at a minimum. I say minimum because of the double game weeks, because of the blank game weeks. Some teams have played more than 6, but my game week range is going to be from 6 game weeks at a minimum. But don't worry, I've kind of filtered the stats according to per game averages, so each stat we go over is going to be per 90 minutes. But don't worry, it'll make a lot more sense when I go over these stats. So let's start off with the attacking stats, which is going to be non-penalty XG. The reason I go for the non-penalty variant is I just feel like from an attacking point of view, you guys can't always predict who's going to get the penalties, who's not. So I've gone for the XG non-penalty variant as it's more consistent. So on the left hand side, since the restart, the number one team from an attacking point of view has been those Brighton assets with 2.15 XG per game. They followed closely by Man City, Liverpool, Newcastle, Arsenal, then finally United. And this is nice to see if you guys are still looking for a Brighton attacker as a Solly March replacement. Now the two teams to highlight are going to be the double game week teams here, both teams featuring Brighton and Newcastle, which you love to see even though they are facing each other in the second game. But other than that, Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal and United pretty expected as they're kind of the next best teams. Now on the right hand side we see a continuation of these Brighton stats. I've always spoken about how good Brighton's attacking stats are, and you guys can see over the last 6 games at a minimum, the number one team with 2.34 XG per game. So recently they have been outperforming their kind of overall averages, which is always nice to see with a double game week coming up. They follow closely by United, Liverpool, Newcastle, Leicester and then finally Man City. So if you guys are looking to play someone like a Trent, just be careful because Leicester's XG per game has been pretty strong even though they are in the relegation battle. But other than that, you guys see Brighton, you guys see Newcastle, and that's why I really am favouring their attackers. I know it might be slightly boring going for one of their attackers as a Solly March replacement, but the stats back it up. So the biggest kind of conclusion from this is that if you guys are looking to bring in players, if you don't have a triple up on Brighton or Newcastle, definitely favour these teams. And don't forget about Man City with their double game week coming up in 37. But with the good teams, we've got the bad teams. Let's go over the worst 6 teams from the restart. And you guys can see that Southampton unfortunately at the top with 0.80. The reason I'm going over these teams is not to target them from an attacking point of view, it's to target them from a defensive point of view, as if your defenders are playing these sides, the chance of a clean sheet has been increased. So as mentioned, unfortunately Southampton, bottom of the table, top of our worst attacking stats, so definitely target them from a defensive point of view. We then have Wolves, Nottingham Forest, Crystal Palace, Fulham, and then finally Leeds. So not great to see Crystal Palace there, so remember this when I talk about them in a couple of talking points. Other than that though, we can see that Leeds game mentioned that Newcastle could keep a clean sheet in the first fixture against Leeds, as the XG per game hasn't been that great. But going on to the last 6 games, at a minimum you guys can see that Wolves are now the worst attack in the Prem at the moment with 0.6 per game. They're followed by Brentford, Chelsea, Nottingham Forest, Fulham, and then finally Southampton. So if you guys are looking to go for maybe a Chelsea attacker, maybe think otherwise. But the rest of these teams are kind of predicted, they're going to be in the relegation battles. And I definitely won't go for any attackers at the time being, but definitely target them as I mentioned from an offensive point of view. But now going to the best defensive stats, slightly more boring than kind of the attacking stats, but always kind of good to go over if you are targeting these sides from an attacking point of view. Think otherwise bring in their defenders. So the number one team on the left hand side since the restart has been Man City with 0.69 XG per game, but I wouldn't say so with the amount of points that Edison's got recently. They're followed by Chelsea, Newcastle, Crystal Palace, Brentford, and then finally Brighton. So Brighton and Newcastle yet again appearing here on the best attack and the best defensive stats. Going to the right hand side, over the last 6 games at a minimum, Man City continuing there on their good form, 0.6, but as mentioned, I don't think Edison has got me any clean sheets over the last 6, so I wouldn't trust him. Surprisingly, we have Aston Villa at 0.75, their defense has improved dramatically recently at least. We then have Crystal Palace, Liverpool, Brentford, and yet again Newcastle. So you guys can see that Newcastle are a better defense than Brighton to target at the moment, or at least recently, and I'm happy with that as I've got a double up at the moment. But if you guys are looking for another defender to go for, I still am going to back Man City. I know Edison hasn't provided the goods, but if you want to go for a Diaz, a Stones, that sort of thing, they could be great value for money over the next couple. But if your attackers are facing these sides, maybe think again, unless they have a double game week. But now going to the worst defenses, these are teams to target, so pay attention right now if you guys want to go for those Campsy options, or at least attackers to bring in, target these fixtures, because they're probably going to haul. So on the left hand side, since the restart, Everton have the worst defense in the Prem at the moment, followed by Nottingham Forest, Leeds, Bournemouth, Fulham, and then finally Leicester. So Leicester's defense has been pretty bad this entire season, so your Mo Salahs, your Trents hopefully can get some attacking returns, so I'm holding thumbs. But otherwise, as expected, your relegation battle teams, your newly promoted sides aren't doing that well from a defensive point of view, and there's one team that's facing 3 of them. But on the right hand side, over the last 6 games at a minimum, Everton have kind of receded from a defensive point of view, 2.58 XG per game, absolutely mental, but as you guys can see, Leeds as well, 2.34. But obviously with Leeds, just got a new manager, can't really see how Big Sam's going to control the side, but if it's anything like the previous game weeks, it's going to be pretty bad. Then we have Nottingham Forest, Southampton, Arsenal, and then finally Spurs. So that's right, the bottom 2 sides there. The North London derby, Spurs and Arsenal not defending that well at the current moment. And that's also good to see as an Ollie Watkins seller. But the one thing to note is that Brighton are facing Arsenal in the first game of their double game week. Could this actually be a good fixture for Brighton, considering the fact that Arsenal's defense has been pretty bad these past couple game weeks? And that's why I'm still going to continue that double up in midfield. So main takeaways here, if your side is facing Everton, probably captain them. Otherwise, nice to see that Leeds and Arsenal both appear on the worst defenses recently for our 2 double game week sides. That's going to kind of wrap up our stats review. We've had some interesting information. It kind of confirms the fact that you should have a triple up on Newcastle and Brighton. As from an attacking and a defensive point of view, the fixtures look pretty strong. But if there are other stats that you guys want to look up, I used Fix for this. So go over to Fantasy Football Fix, go over to the Opta Stats Sandbox, and they have a bunch of stats that you guys can play around with. But the big thing about double game week 36 is, will the stats meet reality? Will Newcastle and Brighton have pretty good double game weeks? Because as of now, it looks pretty strong. Now the next talking point I'm going to be going over is going to be Solly March and what replacements to potentially look at, as it looks like the Brighton midfielder might miss a few game weeks. Now if you guys don't know the game on Monday, Solly March was benched for that game, so I don't really know if it was fitness related, but came off the bench for the second half and unfortunately it looks like he's pulled his hamstring. Now there's no information at the current moment about how bad that tear is going to be. He might be out for a few games, might be out for the entire season, and he might even be back for game week 36. But the current consensus is that he's probably going to miss the upcoming double, maybe the next 2 doubles, and that's why he's a sell in my opinion. So quite highly owned within the top ranks, and myself as an owner, so it's going to be very kind of personal. I'll be going over my favorite replacements. Now the first team I want to highlight is going to be a team that's not going to be Newcastle or Brighton, so if you guys want to go differential, don't want to go for the double game week sides, is a team called Crystal Palace that has great fixtures. You guys can see on screen right now, Bournemouth, Fulham and Nottingham Forest, so in the next 3 games, they have all 3 newly promoted sides, and you guys would have just seen in the stats review, their stats from a defensive point of view aren't that great. Now Crystal Palace's attacking stats aren't that great either, but I think at their cheap price points, they're worth a punt, so you guys can go for an Elise or Eze if you want to do that. Now Wilfred Zaha is slightly more expensive, so you guys have enough funds, you can always look at that, but otherwise Eze and Elise are pretty strong. So this is kind of a reminder about Crystal Palace and their fixtures if you guys do want to go for it. Definitely the best single game week fixtures till the end of the season. But now what you're probably thinking, I'm going to get a Newcastle midfielder, I'm going to get a Brighton midfielder, and that's probably correct, and that's probably what I'm going to do as well. So what I went and did was I went over to the Opta Stats Sandbox on Fantasy Football Fix. I went over their kind of midfielders from Brighton and Newcastle and compared them with expected FPL points. Now these are going to be per 90-minute stats and from the restart, so from game week 17 onwards, so nice little sample size there. And the first thing I want to say is what a pity that Solly March is going to be missing. You guys can see out of the Brighton mids and Newcastle mids, March had the best expected points at 6.21 per game. But he was always kind of a stats merchant. Matoma was the one that was overperforming his stats, where Solly March was underperforming by quite a far margin. Now first things first, if you guys can afford the straight replacement for McAllister, I definitely consider him. To be honest, for me he's the best replacement for Solly March. You probably own Matoma as well, but if you don't, it's quite close between McAllister and Matoma. I would probably recommend getting both of them into your squads though, and that's pretty much the current template. But if you guys do want to go for a Newcastle midfielder, I personally do favour Willock to Joelinton. Now the stats are quite close between these two expected points, 4.84 versus 4.38, but I just feel like Joe Willock's getting more freedom to go in the box. But if you guys do want to go for either of these two, it's almost a 50-50, but if you would prioritise the Brighton mids if you guys can afford it. Now, there might be some other replacements here. There's been talks about since Solly March is out injured, there might be another Brighton mid at a cheaper price point, but I just feel like if you can afford McAllister, that's who you should go for. Now if I say McAllister, obviously Matoma's in that conversation as well, so if you currently own the Argentinian, just go for the Japanese international. Following them is going to be the Newcastle assets. Personally prefer Willock to Joelinton, but either could work. So to kind of conclude this talking point, if I was to kind of rank my replacements, McAllister number 1, Matoma number 2, and then Willock number 3. Now personally, I'll probably go for McAllister, and if you guys can afford him, just please be careful because he might rise in price tonight. But you guys can comment down below, who's your Solly March replacement? Is it Matoma, McAllister, Willock, Joelinton, or is there someone out there that you're looking at, such as an Ezio and Elise? Let me know in the comments down below. Then the next debate to go over is kind of driving me crazy over the past couple of days. It's going to be the Newcastle striker debate. So Callum Wilson versus Isaac is pretty much the hardest choice of double game week 36 if you guys don't own either of them. Now that's my kind of personal situation here. I'm looking to downgrade Ollie Watkins to either Wilson or Isaac, but it's quite hard to choose which one. So what I went and did was I went back to the OptaStats sandbox. I compared these two since the restart, but I also compared them per 90 minutes and then per game. So the first stats are going to be per 90 minutes, and you guys can see that Callum Wilson is slightly favored at 7.02 FPL points per 90 minutes. That's compared to Isaac's 6.42 FPL points per 90 minutes, and that's kind of expected because when Callum Wilson does play, he plays as the striker. Now there's been some talks about Isaac and Wilson playing together. We saw that against Arsenal, don't know how often that's going to happen, but with Longstaff potentially missing the Leeds game, it might happen again. Now in my opinion, if these two had similar minutes, I definitely would go for Callum Wilson over an Isaac. Just seems like Isaac is more versatile, can play on the wings, whereas Callum Wilson, if he does play, he's going to be in the middle. But the biggest thing about Callum Wilson obviously is going to be that injury concern. I do feel like Isaac has the better expected minutes, and therefore the more sensible choice. But if they both got a similar amount of minutes, I definitely would favour Callum Wilson, and you guys can see that by the per 90 stats. But to make things a little bit more fair, I'm going to go over the per game averages, and you guys can see that Isaac is currently leading at 4.39 compared to 4.1. So what this per game is going to tell you is that if these players start or if they don't start, this is how many expected points they're going to get per game. Now the reason I wanted to bring up this stat is I feel like it gives you more kind of a representation of these two players. For example, let's say that Callum Wilson's benched the first game, starts the second game, he's going to average 4.1 points per game. And for me, that's kind of the current situation. I feel like Isaac is the better expected minutes and therefore the higher per game averages, whereas if both players play 90 minutes, Callum Wilson's better. So the debate kind of comes down to, should you go for the safer option, the player that's going to start more minutes, or the player that has the highest ceiling if he does play? Now another thing to note about Newcastle is the games are pretty spread out. I think they play Saturday, Thursday, and then Sunday again, so there might be enough rest for Callum Wilson with these injury concerns. Now with 0.1 splitting these two in terms of cost, not much goes into the price, and therefore this is a super close debate. Now I think I've come down to a conclusion for myself. If you guys can get early team use or wait if you have enough funds for that, I probably would hold out for these transfers. If Callum Wilson does start against Leeds, he's the option I'd bring in. But if you guys have to make a move today, tomorrow, or before we get news, I think Isaac has to be favoured. I think there might just be a slight risk of Callum Wilson potentially being benched for the first game. Yes, he might come off and score off the bench, 100%, but I feel like we have to play the odds and go with the player that's going to start. And in my opinion, that's going to be Isaac. He's more guaranteed to start, also probably plays game week 37 against Leicester, which as you would have seen is a great fixture. So just conclude with what I said previously. If you guys have to make the transfer today, tomorrow, or before we get early team use, I would go for Isaac. But if you guys can wait for that early team use, I hope I can, and we get news that Callum Wilson starts against Leeds, I would rather go for him. But you guys can let me know in the comments down below, which option are you guys kind of going for? Do you already own one of these assets? Do you own Isaac? Or do you own Callum Wilson? But if you didn't own either of them, who would you bring into your squad? Now the final talking point to go over is going to be all about captaincy, and this week it's going to be the double game week players, and we only have two teams. So the first team, and probably the number one option this week, is going to be Isaac, as Newcastle have the better double game week than Brighton. So Leeds away and Brighton at home are going to be the two games for Newcastle and Isaac, and as mentioned, he's the safest option this week to captain. Now if you guys do want to go for a Callum Wilson, a Trippier, that's also 100% fine, but I would add that I trust the attack of Newcastle more than the defense. Now the next double game week team is going to be Brighton. Definitely think Matoma or McAllister are the safe options there. I've gone for Matoma as he's my current team. Now Arsenal away, Newcastle away, that Arsenal game might not be as bad as people are saying. As you would have seen in the stats review, Arsenal's XG conceded isn't that great. So these two assets, I definitely prefer the Newcastle double game week because of that Leeds game, and Brighton with their current rotation do worry me slightly. Now the final option, if you guys do want to go for a single game week captain, you guys can go for Erling Haaland, 100% fine. I just worry about some potential minutes or rotation with the Champions League coming up next week. And that's why I've gone personally for Mo Salah. Now Leicester away is a great game on paper. Liverpool always historically do pretty well against them. And that's why Mo Salah will be my single game week captain of choice. So if you guys do want to go differential, do want to go single game week, Salah's 100% fine, but I'll probably be on Isaac or Callum Wilson. But yet again, you guys can let me know who you captaining in the comments down below. Is it Isaac? Is it Matoma? Is it Callum Wilson? Or are you guys going mega differential? But this is basically a wrap for the video, guys. Hope you did enjoy it. Please like if you didn't subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. See you guys for the team selection coming up where my 2 free transfers might already be made. But I'll be signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL and I'm out. Cheers, bye.